Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. Today, we are exploring one of my favorite grape varieties, Grenache, aka Garnacha, and just in time for Grenache/Garnacha Day, which is September 18th. If you purchase wines from Wine.com to taste along with us, great. Please go ahead and get those open, pour them into some glassware. If you haven't been able to get them, no worries. They're still available on Wine.com. And as always, this video will live on our Wine.com YouTube channel, so you can always get the wine and come back and retaste with us. The three wines that we are tasting in order are the Robert Oatley G18 Grenache, the Selle e Masca Cannonau, and the Las Rocas Garnacha. Don't you love how all three of them have different names for Grenache? We will get into that. I wanted to give a brief overview on Grenache just before we get started. It's a really unique, fun variety, and one of, like I said, my favorites. It is a heat-loving variety. It thrives in the warm Mediterranean climate and does really well with just a lot of sun. And even when it's really dry out, it just kind of it thrives. It's also really successful as an old vine. As the vine gets older, the flavors coming out of the grapes get more intense and concentrated, as do the resulting wines. Grenache is also really successful blender, as I'll call it. It's the primary variety in the Southern Rhone Valley for all the red wines coming out of there. And of course, all Rhone blends around the world often use Grenache. It makes excellent rosé as well. So pretty much what we're saying is Grenache is this lovely, wonderful, unique variety that produces a range of styles. So we're tasting three today that will showcase the typicity of the region from which they come. And we have fantastic guests to be talking about this grape and these regions. I'll bring them in now. From Robert Oatley, we have Deputy Executive Director Chris Hancock. And from Selle e Masca, we have Chief Winemaker Giovanni Pina. And finally, representing Las Rocas, we have Nicholas Paris, Director at EJ Gallo. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here, taking the time to talk with us. Very excited to have you on. I also wanted to mention that we have Nicholas here, who is Master of Wine, and Chris, who is an honorary Master of Wine, which is quite rare. So I hope everybody's prepared to get really geeky with us in talking about our fantastic Grenache grape. So I think we're going to start with Australia and the Robert Oatley Grenache. Chris, first, thank you so much for joining us and being here. It's lovely to have you. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of Grenache in Australia, but I thought maybe you could also fill us in a little bit about your history with Grenache in Australia, because I believe it was the first grape you worked with back in the 70s, correct?
Yeah, yes, it was. It was my first job in 1962. Was standing on the back of a truck forking Grenache grapes into the grape crusher, which I did for 2 or 3 months. That was my introduction to the wine industry. It must have been fun because I just kept going. That was down in McLaren Vale. I fell in love with McLaren Vale then. I've traveled extensively. I've made wine in lots of different places.
You've made wine.
I keep coming home.
Yeah, and you've made wine for Grange, correct?
Yeah, I did some work with Penfolds for about 10 years or so. I found my way around there. Yeah.
All right.
Well, I ended up.
I was just going to say, yes. I was going to say, tell us a little bit about the history of the Grenache grape in Australia.
Sure. Grenache came there with a man called James Busby to Sydney in 1932, not that long after the colony had started in Australia, and was then, of course, a prison colony for English criminals, I suppose, let's call them. He had the idea of starting vineyards there. And he brought Grenache with him that he found in Perpignan. He'd done an extensive survey of the European vineyard regions and collected a lot of varieties there. It found its way, Grenache found its way to South Australia in the early 1840s, and a gentleman called Thomas Hardy, there's still a very famous firm named after him, took the Grenache cuttings down to McLaren Vale and planted them there, and that was where Grenache started. It became, over the years, probably the dominant variety of Australian grape varieties in the 1800s and through the early 1900s. We were great providers of fortified red wines to England in those days, and Grenache was indeed perfect for that. There were probably, it's hard to say exactly, but there were probably something like 20,000 hectares, 50,000 acres of Grenache in Australia in its prime between the wars, the 1920s and 1930s. After World War II, the sales of the fortified red wine fell away. Crops, the vineyard areas reduced to about 7,000 hectares. And then with the onset of the table wine revolution, they dropped even further. And today there are probably only 1,500 hectares of Grenache in Australia, of which 2/3 of that is shared between McLaren Vale and the Barossa Valley, which provide really ideal homes for it. And most of the vines that remain are heritage vines, old bush vines, many dating back to the 19th century. They've provided a magnificent resource for this incredible resurgence that we're having Grenache today.
Wonderful. And like I said, I'm a huge fan. I love it from Australia. People usually think of Shiraz coming there. So the ideal places for Grenache are Barossa and McLaren Vale. Is that where you'll find the most?
Yeah, the so-called Mediterranean climates with the hot, dry summers and the cooler, wet winters are just perfect for it. It's a heat-loving grape. We see it that way. And we see, you mentioned it earlier, we see a great future for Grenache as climate change creeps up on us because it just loves a little bit of warmth.
Yeah. So also, you had mentioned how old the vines are, and obviously Grenache does very well as an old vine, but where you are has never been hit by phylloxera, correct?
No.
So you're able to have these old original vines. And how old did you say they were?
Indeed. Well, they're vines we know dating back to 1893. Many of the vineyards were planted in the late 1940s as well. Very few vineyards have been planted since 1980. So we're very lucky having that heritage.
Yes, and it's also popular, obviously, to blend Grenache, which I touched on a little bit earlier in Southern Rhone, but Australia does that also. What are some of the most popular grape varieties for blending in that region?
Oh, Shiraz and Mourvedre, Moristel, Matara, whichever you want to call it. GSM, I mean, the Australians are great for calling things by nicknames. and it became GSM, and it is now pretty much a standard.
Yeah, and they're delicious as well. So, well, let's taste through this. This is the Oatly G18. This is one of my favorite wines.
I happen to have a glass here.
Okay.
You know, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, don't you? This is not normal.
That's okay. You're a professional. We can do this.
Yes.
So, I would love for you to, just taste it with us. Maybe talk us through a little bit about the characteristics we're getting, the flavor profile, and how that represents McLaren Vale.
Sure. Well, one of the things we do to great lengths to ensure is that we keep the purity of the variety. We see that as very important. So there's very little, you could say no artifice in this wine. What you see is the grape, and that's sort of really important in the way that we go through our fermentation processes and our maturation process and so on. To my mind, the nose, I describe it as ethereal. It's really quite lifted. Mm-hmm. And it's got that lovely sort of fragrance about it that I think defies description to some degree. Underneath it, sort of cherry berry characters. Once again, I find it very hard to break it out into individuals like that. It's just lovely cherry berry characteristics.
There's some floral to it. There's some like sweet herb kind of lavender. I don't know, but it's ethereal. It's something I can't pinpoint all the time because it's so well done, and it is that it's one of those uplifting wines because it's just bright, you know.
It's a happy wine.
It's a happy wine. It will make you happy.
The palate is light, round. It's quite crisp in the front palate, and then sort of mid palate, you start getting this quite firm underlying tannin in it, and it finishes really quite dry. The tannin is quite drying at the back palate. Very, very typical of Grenache. With the purity of the flavors and stylistically, I think, and that's what we've fought very hard to maintain.
And you only use old oak. Oh, you said you only use old oak to help maintain that.
Yeah, and not a lot of it. I mean, fermentation we go through is whole berry, and we're aided a lot by more modern techniques and equipment to be able to do this. We do backfill with a little bit of stalk, provided the stalk is ripe, phenologically ripe. Cool ferment, just to try and protect the flavors. So 23, 24 Celsius is about where we go. Very little maceration. The challenge with Grenache and the way that we're producing it, it's almost a white wine, and it's quite prone to oxidation. So, we take great care with it. We put some of it into old oak, really to stabilize the tannins. The oak flavor we see in these wines is not where we want to go. We want to protect that fruit over time. And pretty early bottling as well.
Yeah, well, with this kind of beautiful, pretty purity fruit, what do you suggest people pair with this from a food perspective? What are your favorites to enjoy?
Gosh. Yeah, I think any foods that are not too strong or too spicy, they tend to overpower the more gentle flavors of the wine. Sort of things I like: char grills. So char grilled veal chops, fantastic. Let them be pink inside, really, really delicious. Roasted vegetables, go great with it. And it's salads that are made with roasted vegetables and feta and, kale, quinoa, all this healthy stuff.
Well, that's why it's a great wine for vegetarian food, which is good. I think that vegetarians are often looking for red wines that go well. So, well, thank you so much, Chris. I love this wine. It's fantastic, and I appreciate all your insight into it. So, Giovanni, we are going to move over to Sardinian Cannonau, and I know it's late for you there. Thank you so much for being with us. And also, I'm so excited because Nicholas speaks Italian also, so if I'm talking too fast, you can help. But welcome, Giovanni. Thank you for being with us again. I wanted to first talk about the Cannonau. So we call this grape Cannonau in Sardinia. What makes it unique here in Sardinia?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here to talk about Sardinia, about Selle Mosca, and about Cannonau. I apologize for my English, but I won't try to give you some information about Sardinia and Cannonau. Also, it may seem trivial, I want to remind you where Sardinia is. Frequently traveling around the world, I meet many people who don't know where Sardinia is. The island of Sardinia is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and its geological origin came from the Franco-Iberian Peninsula, not from the North Africa like the rest of Italy. But what is the mean of Middle Mediterranean Sea? The mean is the climate. We have a very beautiful climate with the very hot summer, a warm winter. We have a lot of wind, sun and light. Good condition for viticulture, but special for organic viticulture. Actually, we have 550 hectares in Selle Mosca that we carry on in organic cultivation. But where we are in Sardinia, where is Selle Mosca in Sardinia? Selle Mosca is in the northwest of Sardinia, in Alghero area, a small area with a very small town, really beautiful, with a nice beach and nice sea. But fortunately, we have also beautiful vineyards too. The Selle Mosca activity started in 1899 when two Piedmonts came from the Piedmont, Sella and Mosca came in Sardinia and started with the activity with the production of the graft to reconstruct the Italian and European vineyard destroyed by the Phylloxera. And Cannonau is really ancient. I think it exists in Sardinia 3,000 years, I think, around. I don't know the exactly reason of the name, you know? There are several theories. Perhaps the most reliable is that which refers to the use of the cane for the breeding of the vine. No? Cane Cannonau. Some research show that in Sardinia, ancient civilization domesticates the vine. This is evidenced by the seed found in during the archaeological excavation in ancient well dug in the rocks by the prehistoric inhabitants. Subsequent genetic studies carried out on the seed confirmed the Sardinia origin of Cannonau. Cannonau is present in our diets. I think a lot of people in Sardinia drink Cannonau. We have one of the 5 blue zones in the world. No? One is in Sardinia, one is in Japan, in Okinawa, one is in Costa Rica, and one is in California, Loma, and one is in Greece. The blue zones are the area where there is a high presence of centenaries. Actually, in Sardinia, we have around 8,000 hectares. The Cannonau grape is the most diffuse grape that we have in Sardinia. We can call Cannonau di Sardegna DOC in all the Sardinia, but I think it's different, the Cannonau in different area, Alghero area, the center, the south, the west. And we can call it Reserva after 2 years, after we can carry on the aging for 2 years, no? And we must use wood for the aging, minimum 6 months, 6 months in wood. I think it's better for the Cannonau.
You use old barrels or new? Are they all old barrels?
No, we use old barrels. Frequently, you use big barrel, no barrels.
Botte? Botte? Aren't they called botte? The large
botte.
One Italian word.
A lot of people think the Cannonau is really strong, but it's not true. Cannonau is strong in alcohol, but non in structure, in polyphenol, in tannins. It's delicate, it's elegant. If we use new barriques, we cover the varieties. We prefer use old barriques, old barrels, not new.
Yeah. And how old are your vines? The vines for Cannonau in Sardinia?
Well, we have different vineyards. Some is new, like 10 years or 15 years, but we have also old vineyards around 80 years or more.
Okay.
Yes.
So those old vines too, a little bit of both.
Yes.
Okay. And Salamasca, how long has Salamasca been making Cannonau?
120 years.
Okay. So a while, you know what you're doing. So I'd love to taste this wine, and if you could talk a little bit about the flavor profile and how this represents Cannonau, this wonderful grape that, like you said, from the blue zones, we have these 5 blue zones, and Cannonau is kind of a big part of Sardinian life, of these wonderful centenarians. And but if you could talk to us a little bit about how it's different, the style that's coming from Sardinia. Yes?
Different, sorry, different?
Just how it represents Sardinia as a flavor, what's coming out of the wine.
Okay. Like I told before, we have different area. Alghero area is near the sea. The mistral that came from the sea bring the salt on the vineyard, and you can taste it in the wine. The vintage that we are going to drink is 2017. You can see the color. The color is red ruby, and the flavor is delicate. No, you can smell the violet, the flower, no, the cherry. And the Mediterranean spice like rosemary, thyme.
Thyme, yeah.
And the wood is low, is really gentle.
Yes, it's extraordinarily gentle. It's just very smooth, and I don't use that word a lot, but it's just really pretty and
delicate. Is elegant. It's not really strong. You can taste them. The alcohol is 14, is not really high. It's warm.
But there's a wonderful balance between that floral and kind of the wild lavender, wild herb.
Yes, it's balanced. The acidity is not really strong, no? Like in the other wine that you can find the south of Italy. The acidity is around 5 grams per liter. It's balanced. It's
beautiful. Let's go ahead. Continue.
It's long. Yes. You can taste the salt in the mouth. No?
It's very bright and pretty, and round. What kind of food does one pair with Cannonau?
You can appear Cannonau with the meat, no? We have special meat we can call sacred pig. You know sacred pig?
Yeah, I think
it's a perfect marriage. It's a perfect marriage with the sacred pig, but you can drink it with the different kind of pasta too.
Yeah, this is a light enough wine, I think, that would go with milder foods. It just seems very perfect for a lot of different food pairings. So Giovanni, thank you so much. Grazie for your time. I know it's harvest time, and I know it's late, so I appreciate you being here with us. Grazie.
It's true.
So we're going to move over to Spain, to Las Rocas. And Nicholas, thank you for being here to represent this incredible place. To start, let's talk a little bit about where Las Rocas Garnacha is grown and why this region, Catalunya, is so ideal for the grape.
Yeah, so we're in north central Spain, about 3.5 hours from Barcelona to the west, or 2.5 from Madrid, fairly north. It's a very mountainous region. And I think there's a few things that make it very special. One is, and I have to argue with a little bit of fun with Giovanni about the origin of the grape variety, because some claim it's from Sardinia, some claim it's from Aragon. In any event, we both have very old vines, but there's a few things that make it special. So one is the rocks that you see on the screen right here. In fact, I even have some of the rocks in my wine cellar here in Connecticut where I live. And it's a very interesting type of slate. They call it pizarra in the region. And those types of soils are found at higher elevations. And then we also have nearby, actually lower down the slopes, we have more limestone rocks. And if you look at the name of the wine, it's called Las Rocas, which means in Spanish, the rocks. And it refers to those rocks that you find in the vineyards. The limestone soils retain a lot of water, and they tend to have a cooler microclimate around the vine, producing wines that are quite elegant, very fresh, whereas the more slate soils retain that heat during the day and radiate it back at night, so helping to further ripen the fruit. In general, as was said before, hot and dry climates are ideal for Garnacha because they tend to bud early and then ripen late. And this is an ideal growing area for that as well. And then the elevation is unique. Here we have a lot of our vines at over 1,000 meters, so right around 3,500 feet in elevation. And for every 300 feet or so you climb in elevation, temperature drops about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So what that means is, even though you get all that extra sunshine, even though it's warm and dry, you're preserving the acidity in the grapes because during the metabolic process, the vine is not breaking down the acids and the sugars as much. So it's holding on to those. And we talked about pH before. The pH is very low in this area, about 3.2 to 3.4 when the grapes are picked, and then getting somewhere between 3.4 and 3.6. Those are some of the lowest pHs in the world. What that means in the glasses, this impression of very high acidity, great freshness. Yeah. And a lot of the Garnachas in the world are blended with other grapes like Syrah and Mourvedre. But as an example, because it tends to have relatively thin skins, it has maybe moderate acidity levels. But when you have older vines, as we have here as well, going up to 100 plus years, as well as the higher elevation, what you're having in these very poor soils, you're having smaller vines, smaller bunches with thicker and smaller grapes with thicker skin to juice ratio. So you're getting these extra levels of tannin, this extra level of concentration in the wine that you wouldn't have from Grenache otherwise, unless it's old vine, unless it's higher elevation and the vine's struggling due to poor soils.
Yeah, and that is, I guess, a lot of times it is blended because sometimes it does better with that extra structure or extra color. But those older vines are really amazing. And I love your point about the acid and sugars, and yes, they're usually gets higher sugars, but to have that go really slowly and balanced to maintain that acid makes it just so delicious and enjoyable. And I'm a huge fan of Las Rocas. It was one of the first wines I started drinking in my 20s, I think, maybe. How long has Las Rocas been around?
It's been around for a while. Yeah, about at least 20 years ago. For you, I mean, only, I'm assuming that was only 4 or 5 years ago.
No, I know I remember it being this kind of, it was newer, okay. Probably about 20 years ago, but, or 15, yeah, but I do remember trying it and loving it. And I loved the price point. It was just affordable, and right. It still is. And that is a fantastic thing about it as well. So, and I love your new label. Can you show us the label? Because I'm in the room. Love that. I think it just
one about 2016, which I think shows the rocks, which shows the terroir, the terruño in Spanish. Captures Calatayud. Yeah,
that's beautiful. So let's taste that a little bit and maybe talk about how this kind of what we're getting in the nose and the flavor profile and how that kind of showcases where we're coming from.
So I think you get some of those classic Grenache notes, the Garnacha notes, like ripe strawberry, ripe raspberry, and then also some red and black cherry as well. So there's a combination of red and dark fruits, a little bit of that pepperiness, nice aromatics to the wine. And again, on the palate, the tannins are kind of medium, but the acidity is pretty fresh.
Yeah,
The other speakers have said, it's not a big wine in terms of structure, but it has nice richness to it. It's not a fleshiness, a juicy character to the wine, but balance. And I think Garnacha is one of the grape varieties that has so much potential in the future. So very food friendly, such a beautiful wine on its own as well. It's
terribly food friendly. So what are your favorite foods on that?
Well, if I'll start with what's local there. I mean, it depends on the style of wine. What they eat a lot of, they also have the roast suckling pig, which in Spain they call cochinillo. But local to that area, they have something called Ternasco de Aragon, which is actually an IGP. It's a classified region, and it's baby lamb. Lamb shoulder, braised in a stew, mildly seasoned, and it's just so beautiful with lamb dishes. I would say this version is not too heavy either. It could be great with flavorful chicken dishes. We're not in Italy, but if you wanted to do pasta in a red sauce or pizza, it's quite versatile.
Yeah, and I know that makes sense because you look to the Rhone with their Grenache blends. They often recommend lamb and those sorts of same dishes. So that makes a lot of sense. It is a beautiful wine. It's really fantastic, and again, super affordable. Actually, all of these are, and I love that. And I think that all three of these show such great diversity of what this grape can kind of bring out from each region. And you have some similarities with these red berry fruits, and you have, not too high of acid or tannins, medium structure, but this just really pretty aromatics for all three. And so, but yet super different in their own way. So,
right. And the wine is similar to a lot of what Chris and Giovanni said, in that the Grenache grape is prone to oxidation. So you generally don't give it too much oak aging or oxygen exposure. So we do use a little bit of barriques, but mostly larger barrels and also cement. The percentage of new oak is relatively small, about 15 to 20%, depending on the vintage. We ferment it cool as well. We're looking to express the fruit, not extract too much from the grape variety. We already have the great structures and acidity in the Las Rocas Garnacha.
Right. So Grenache in general, in this wine, and then maybe if you have opinions on the other, of aging potential, I feel like Grenache is again, because of that oxidation tendency, it's something that's typically drunk young. When would you recommend to ever age Garnacha?
Well, I think in this example, I would drink this when it's certainly young. I mean, anywhere between, let's say, 2 to 5 years, it's beautiful, it's pleasant. If the Garnacha has enough concentration, if it has the right structural elements like acidity and sufficient tannin and fruit, it can age for 5 to 10 years. But in general, I'm drinking this Garnacha on the younger side because I want to appreciate that fresh fruit that it has.
Yeah, and that's what Grenache does. I'm the same way. I just didn't know if anybody else felt differently. So thank you for that. I think, again, love all these wines. I think they were great representations. I wanted to kind of finish on, a lot of people have climate change on their mind. There's lots of things going on in the world, and many regions around the world are getting warmer. They're getting hotter and drier. Grenache is this heat-loving grape and does well in dry climates. So I was kind of wanted to touch on what you see as the future for Grenache as we kind of continue to get warmer. I don't know, Giovanni, would you like to touch on that at all? Of Grenache as our climate gets warmer? And
I don't know because I think actually the climate is a little bit different, but I think in the future, I don't know if the trend goes in a strong change. I don't know, because sometimes we think that the climate is changing quickly, but I think there are long periods where the climate change and then return, change and return. For instance, the last years we harvest in October. This year we are harvesting in September, at the 1st of September. And depend. Effectivamente is changing, but I don't know if in the future goes to change ancora, no?
Still, yeah.
Sorry for my English.
It's good. It makes sense, especially you're on an island that has its own almost climactic influences that you deal with as well. Nicholas, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know you know a lot of wines in a lot of regions, so.
Right. Well, I think we're going to see more of Garnacha. Part of it's a commercial question, but certainly from a climate perspective, as we've been talking about, it loves hot and dry conditions. And I do think we're seeing a lot more dryness in the world. Climate change is affecting us in a number of ways, but we're seeing earlier harvests as a general rule. Every vintage can vary, but we're seeing earlier harvests. We're seeing higher sugar levels potentially. And I think a lot of those grape varieties, you often take a look at different fine wine regions throughout the world and you say, okay, what they're growing today, they're not going to be growing in 30 to 40 years from now. So what is it that they are going to be growing? I think Grenache has a ton of potential. I think more and more people need to get to know the variety, but it's relatively easy to grow. To make fine wine out of it, though, you have to control those yields, right? Because it's very vigorous. It wants to produce a lot of fruit, but put it in a warm and dry area, control those yields, whether it's through careful pruning and canopy management, or it's through climate or older vines and so on. You could produce some lovely wines in a lot of areas. So I think you're going to see a lot of future for this grape variety. Cool,
because I love Grenache, so I'm in. Chris, what about you? Because I know you feel like it's a more finicky variety in producing. What are your thoughts on the climate and the warmth and the grape?
Well, I think if anybody has been following the news, you see the bushfires in Australia earlier, 6-8 months ago. You see what's happening with the wildfires in California now, and that's a pretty good indication. In McLaren Vale in December of 2018, we had 49.4 degrees one day, which is pretty hot.
Oh.
We had 10 days in a row of over 40 degrees and another heat wave there. This is unprecedented, and it's become a big wake-up call, really. And what happens is, of course, let's call them softer varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay just shrivel up under these conditions. It's very, very difficult for us. And we're really pushing toward the heat-tolerant varieties, and of which Grenache is an important one, of course. And some of the Mediterranean white grapes as well. Fiano in particular is one which is quite heat-tolerant. And just moving in that direction. This is not going to be a massive switch. It will happen gradually over time. For example, I have a little vineyard over there. I'm just taking out Cabernet Sauvignon, replacing it with Grenache, believe it or not, for these reasons. And I think modern techniques now with winemaking, we can make Grenache, I think, pretty much a standard red wine, a go-to red wine. It so much more suits our food, our living style, and all of these sorts of things now. It's fitting very, very comfortably into the way that we're developing now. And we can see a very strong move away from these heavy, dark, rich, sort of sweet fruit wines, more towards the lighter, more delicate, more fragrant red wines. And I think commercially it makes a lot of sense, but also from a survival point of view, it's an imperative. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Those are all wonderful insights. And I want to thank you again for being here to talk about this delightful grape that makes such pretty wines with so much character that I love dearly. So for those of you at home, we still have the set available at Wine.com. So if you didn't get a chance to taste, highly recommend. All 3 of these just are fantastic to showcase what this grape can do and what it is. And we also have plenty of other Grenache and Garnacha options for people to explore. But thank you again, and happy International Grenache Day. This is what we are celebrating. So cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Oh.
Grazie.
Gracias.
That's it. You're welcome.
Gracias. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.